All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. This is our first webinar on the electric vehicle charging use specification. My name is Nick Nigro. I work at Atlas Public Policy based in Washington, DC. I'm joined by my colleague, James. We really appreciate you all joining us today. And if your colleagues couldn't join, don't worry, we're recording this and it'll be published online shortly after the meeting. So let's get right into it. So we're going to do an overview. I'm going to provide some background on why we think a charging use specification is helpful and necessary for our industry. Then a little bit about why Atlas is in a good position to help put this thing together, or at least spearhead it for all of us. And then James is going to get into the serious details of what's in the spec, what are the kinds of things we're trying to collect, what lessons we've learned. If folks have questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. As I mentioned, we're going to be recording this meeting for everyone. And if you don't get your question answered, or if you think of it afterwards, you can feel free to send an email to the email address info@evchargingspec.org, which is the website where we created for this project. So why do we need a charging spec? There's a few reasons at least. I'm going to run through them real quick for you all. First is really valuable to the industry and to public policymakers and utility companies and all those involved in charging deployment to get a good sense on how the charging equipment is being used. Not just to be good stewards of the public dollar in the case of public programs, but also to inform market strategy, the development of future charging programs, and the like. It's also critical to understand the importance of charging and EV grid integration. As the market grows, there's going to be greater impact potentially on local grids, and getting an understanding of how that all works can be assisted by the use of a real common way of collecting charging use data. So another reason why is to really just to streamline the process of collecting it. We've got 50 states in DC, got charging programs that are active and growing here. And it's really important for an industry that we have a common way of doing this, establishing best practices and doing things efficiently. This spec can be cited in RFPs, it can be cited in contracts, it can be used to ensure that we have a consistent way of collecting data and reporting on that data across different programs within a jurisdiction and across jurisdictions around the country. This is a national market, as you all know, and it can be quite important to the research community and others involved in the marketplace to have a common way to do apples to apples comparison across programs. And last but not least, we've got a lot of money coming into the charging market in the near future, thanks to federal infrastructure funding. We also have over $3 billion of approved ratepayer funds for investor-owned utilities going into infrastructure. All that is to say is a lot of money is going to be spent in the next few years. A lot of programs are going to be requiring the collection of charging use data, and to avoid redundancy, improve efficiency, and allow for that apples to apples comparison. We really thought this charging use data specification would help streamline that process and make all of our programs across the country more efficient, and to help to better establish lessons learned and really grow this market to where we all want to see it in the near future. So a charging use data specification, we've posted it on GitHub. I think James dropped it in the chat. There's going to be links to it throughout the presentation. It's open for all to participate in, to contribute to. This is really intended to be an open source effort. From Atlas's side, we're just facilitating this process to make this information available to you for your use as you see fit. This is not unique in that other places, aspects of transportation have similar specification efforts ongoing, including the transit feed specifications or general transit GTFS, and the mobility data specification maintained by the Open Mobility Foundation, which is used more for local micromobility and other kinds of similar programs. And so we thought we could build off these kinds of efforts to do something for the charging community. And so you might ask yourself, well, why is Atlas Public Policy doing this? You're a for-profit company. Those of us who don't know us, we've been around since 2015. We do work with lots of public agencies, some utilities, numbers of other players in the industry, along with nonprofits and foundations. We have a real mission to advance electrification of the transportation building sectors, really towards decarbonization. We do a lot of other work in disinformation too, but that's a little out of scope for this conversation. And so that mission-driven aspect of our company really drove us to want to try to provide this service to the public. We have a lot of relevant experience that we've worked with partners across the industry in the past, including NYSERDA in New York, the energy office up there, the Colorado Energy Office, the Joint Utilities of New York. This is a collection of the investor-owned utilities operating in the state of New York, and Electrify America. So with all of these of our customers, we've collected charging use data and helped them use that data. So we had a lot of built-up experience, and we've recognized a lot of the challenges and opportunities of having a common way to do that. And so we want to thank those folks for supporting our work, either directly or indirectly, on coming up with some good practices for the kinds of data that we think should be collected and the ways in which we should try to collect it. And it's that work that really, and along with the anticipated funding that we saw coming in, where we really wanted to inspire us to create this specification. As I mentioned, we're a mission-driven company. This is not really meant to be something where Atlas is expecting to implement across the country. In fact, we likely won't be participating in a lot of these charging programs as they come to fruition around the nation. We're really just trying to help make sure that the way that data gets collected captures the best practices, helps grow the market, and allows for folks to really understand how well the charging equipment is being used across jurisdictions and across programs. We want to thank the Alliance for Transportation Electrification, who's funding all the time we've put into putting together the actual common spec. And a special shout out to the folks at NYSERDA and the Joint Utilities of New York. We are currently working with them on some programs up there, and the lessons we've learned from those programs are really feeding into that common spec, and vice versa. We've done a lot of outreach. James will mention that towards the end of the presentation, to a number of the folks both on this line and around the country about what kinds of things are important to them in this charging spec. And they've all provided great input both into the spec and into our own individual work that we've had with our customers. So we greatly appreciate that input. Okay, so as I mentioned, if you got some questions, just drop them in the chat and we'll try to get to them as we go. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to James to walk through some of the details of the spec. Go ahead, James.
Thanks, Nick. And thank you all for being here and sticking with us as we go through this. So I'm gonna start at a high level. We're gonna walk you through this current specification and what we're trying to achieve with it. And I just want to reiterate that the specification is live on GitHub, and the link is in the chat. And I encourage you guys on your own time to poke around to get a little more of a ground level understanding of the specific fields and type of data we're looking to standardize here. At a high level, the specification is split up between core specification, which we kind of see as it's focused on the station registration and session data, and then extensions, which deal with additional reporting needs like reliability, grid impacts, costs. Those extensions are not currently released yet, so those we'll have a roadmap later, and we'll talk about the next steps on those. In addition, we have a glossary of terms to ensure we're all speaking the same language, a common field type definitions list that specifies formatting for data transmitted in the core spec and extensions, and then some supplementary materials that should be helpful for implementation of the specification. Going into the core spec and station registration, the core specification deals really with registering stations and collecting session data. Accurate registry of the stations is key to successful reporting efforts, and it's one of the largest issues that we encounter in reporting projects is that session data can't be accurately associated with funded stations, which really makes this process incredibly important. Because if you can't associate your session data or usage data with the station, you reduce the value of your reporting data because you can't You can't take that and then summarize it in ways that are useful or associate it with geography, with program, with a lot of different really important reporting aggregations. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna go back and just walk you through how the station registration structure is set up. So everything starts with project, which is the set of charging equipment installed under a single funding program. So when someone comes in and applies for funding, that funding goes into kind of the project, and all the project and program level information goes there. That is then related to a site or a location. Is a project will be put in at a specific geographic location, and then it can actually be serially more projects go in the same location. And then both site and project are associated with stations. So those are the actual equipment that go in that are either funded by the project or exist at that site. And then the station is really like the key reporting unit here. And that's where the identifier is really crucial to associate the session data with the station, and then by extension, kind of what it inherits from site and project. And the station includes information about number of plugs, power level, connector type, et cetera. And you can have different kinds of stations at the same site and same project, but the station is really the fundamental reporting unit. So moving on here, then we talk about session data, and this is the other component of the core specification in terms of collection, whereas the registry is really collected at the time of onboarding, or should be collected and recorded at the time of onboarding. The station or the session data is collected continually. This is the usage data that comes in from either the program participant themselves, or commonly comes through charging networks. We've designed this really to be container agnostic, so it can be delivered in a number of formats, including a manually filled spreadsheet for someone who doesn't have a network station, all the way up to a data portal or even an API. And this is going to include information like session date and time, duration, energy delivered, and a number of other fields that are important for reporting. Again, I encourage you to take a look at the fields in the specification for a little more on the ground information on that. The other two parts of our core spec are validations and reporting. So the validation section is just defining a process to ensure conformity and to screen for errors. So those are things as simple as missing values and duplicates to things that are more complicated, like short or excessive length of sessions, too much or too little energy, or invalid geography if a station finds its way into a program that shouldn't have been reported in that program. And then we have a section on reporting. And this is this is describing how you can summarize registration and session data into useful reporting metrics for your program. So for program administrators, you could look for things as basic as session count, up to things like CO2 reduction, energy delivered across a whole program, or at any aggregation level supported by the details you have on the stations that are reporting usage behavior. And this is really not meant to be a prescriptive list or exhaustive. It's meant to kind of show a menu of options of things that are supported by the specification that can be reported out of the data that you get. So our roadmap. So we are currently heading up to a V1 release. Right now, what is live on GitHub is our sort of beta for this V1 release. And so we're soliciting comments, and it is currently live on GitHub. Any comments that are submitted prior to June 30th, we can guarantee will be considered. We'll respond to them, and they will be informing the V1 release, any changes that happened before that. We also have extensions on the horizon, and so those are the ones I mentioned earlier, and these will be extensions to the core spec for things on like cost metrics and data collection for how much it costs to put in stations, the installation costs broken down into category, just basically giving a much deeper look into the cost of deploying charging stations, station reliability metrics, and then grid impact metrics. Especially on the station reliability and grid impact metrics, we are looking for input from interested parties on how to best measure those concepts and collect kind of the grid impact and interval data from stations. So the way that you can get involved and contribute is the easiest way, or at least the most direct way, is to comment and suggest changes on GitHub. Because GitHub is designed for open source projects, you can go in and you can go into the discussions tab and you can log into a GitHub or create a GitHub account and make specific discussion items, which not only we will see and be able to interact with, but anyone else using GitHub can also interact, vote on in a very kind of open process. The other option that you have is making pull requests, which is just a way of saying go and suggest actual specific line item changes to the specification. So that can be as anything from you making a change to correct a typo up to suggesting a completely different anything from the charging use spec. You can suggest a different language, different table items. Basically, the open source nature of this means that you can take it and make whatever changes you want, and then instead of having to have that in a discussion, have it as an actual edit to the document. We are also taking comments by email, if that would be preferable to anyone. Those can go to info@evchargingspec.com. We will be publishing those on GitHub, the comments, because we want to keep this as open source and transparent as possible. However, you can just determine in that email whether or not you want to be attributed. So if you want to make an anonymous comment, we will keep you anonymous. Currently, our engaged parties list is here. We've been talking to Alliance for Transportation Electrification, Idaho National Laboratory, the State Energy and Environmental Offices, a number of federal agencies and state associations, and also utilities and charging service providers. And if you would like to be listed under an engaged party, your organization, company, etc., please let us know by sending us an email.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that last part. We really appreciate a lot of the folks on the line here have actually been contributors to this point. Because we're going to publish this online and on the website, evchargingspec.org. We didn't want to put your name on there unless you gave us permission to do so. So if it is okay to say that you have been a party that has been contributing in some way, shape, or form to this effort, please let us know if we can list your name there. I think it will bolster the value of it to the community so that they know these groups are participating in it. It's not to say that you endorse every facet of it, but it is to say that you have provided some input and feedback. And so please let us know if that's okay. We'll take those requests as they come, or we'll take that feedback as it comes in. So those are the slides we had. Thanks so much, James, for presenting, and thanks to Peter and Josh and Atlas who are helping behind the scenes to make sure that the spec was accurate and reflecting the data and learnings that we've had from processing data from charging stations over the last several years. So as James mentioned, we've got an early release online on GitHub now. We're looking forward to your feedback and potential use of the spec. We definitely recommend, if you can, referencing it in your RFPs and in your other outward-facing materials on how you want to do reporting, because we think ultimately this industry having a common way to do reporting is going to make it more efficient for the subcontractors and the consultants you hire to collect all that data, and for the market participants. It'll be a heck of a lot easier for the charging network providers and utilities if there's a common way for bringing this all together. And last but not least, I'm sure those research folks would really appreciate being able to compare apples to apples across jurisdictions and programs. So that's what we have for you today. We're happy to take any questions. Folks are welcome to come off mute if they'd like. Otherwise, we're always free to wrap up early too. We have time. Does anyone have questions?
Hi, this is Jen Riley at Connecticut DOT.
Hi, Jen.
So, hi, Nick. So does the tool do the aggregation once you put the information into it?
The important question. So right now, the purpose of the spec is just the document. It's the process. We're documenting how we think the data should be collected. We are anticipating being able to publish some open source tools that vendors or consultants or whoever could use to try to implement facets of the spec. But we're not effectively providing the turnkey, if you will. We are right now just working on the process, but we do hope in the fall to be able to work on and publish some open source tools to help you implement facets of the spec.
So it would be possible for you to take in data, do an automated validation based on the rules that we've set in the validation document, and then put out the reporting items that output the reporting items that we have identified as supported by the spec. And presuming that you have valid inputs, that should be something that can be automated very well.
Are you imagining like an Excel document that we could like put into the tool? Would that be a acceptable type format?
An Excel,
yet.
we're not at the point of choosing software. Excel is not generally the first tool used for this kind of process, but it can be, and certainly it could be an Excel tool. In the open source nature of GitHub, we'll probably be developing things in Python to deliver.
Yeah, I think James brings up an important point, Jen, in terms of tools. We're going to look to you all to provide feedback to us about what's actually going to be most useful for how you want to implement your programs. If convening on a common way of doing that from a tool perspective is going to be important in addition to having the specification here. And so we'll look to you all for some input there. I see Matt, you've got your hand raised?
Yeah. Hey, Nick, first of all, this is awesome. Really excited to see all this. Curious on the engaged parties with the trading service providers. Curious if you could share any anecdotes of their reception to this, just trying to anticipate, data burdens or this is too much, et cetera. Just curious how they've reacted to what you've included.
So it's a great question, an important one. Ultimately, the obligated parties in here are an important part of the process. And we've tried to reach out to as many of those folks as possible to get input on what we put together to date. What I'll say is they are heavily influencing how we think about what's possible. A lot of it has come from what their hardware can and cannot do most easily, and what is the burden of making data available in a way that might conform with a program requirements or not. And so to that end, what we've put out in this quote unquote version 1 is what we think that is sort of a baseline to start with. Some of the other facets of program requirements that are out there, we haven't put in yet because we think we need to talk more with the industry and with you in the market, other market participants like the folks on this call to figure out what makes most sense. A good example of that is what James mentioned earlier about vehicle grid integration evaluation. So in some programs, you've got a requirement for interval data. There's varied abilities for charging providers to facilitate, support that, either from a technical or from a business standpoint. And so we want to figure out what makes sense for all facets of the parties involved in these projects, ultimately with the goal of figuring out what's a good policy design, what's a good program design here. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate it.
I will add that, like Nick said, most of the stuff in this core spec are things that we have seen are able to be provided by most participants and already are, at least in some way or another. And so if we have essentially the more programs that are using this spec as their recording template, the easier this becomes, the lower the compliance burden becomes, because it reduces the number of formats that they might have to be producing to satisfy, a program in New York versus a program in California versus a program in Washington.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to comment on what any individual charging provider has said about like their excitement or not excitement about this thing. But generally, they understand that this is part of the game of getting either funding from a utility or from a public agency. And so compliance is a requirement. But we also want to make sure as a mission-driven policy shop that whatever requirements are there are actually going to lead to good public policy. And it's not just collecting data for the sake of collecting data. And so that's the balance we got to try to figure out how to strike here. And that's why we really value the input of you folks who are either in the program design side or the compliance side on the other hand. So the more feedback we get, I think the better off we'll be there. Quinn asks a question here in the chat. Are you thinking something like a DTA file? James, do you have that one understood? I don't know what file format that is, to be honest.
So we are container agnostic. If that's the question you're asking, I mean, it can be any number of tabular formats that we can support. So I don't know if that's the question or if that answers your question.
Quinn, yeah, maybe you could come off mute and chat a little bit more about what you mean.
Yeah, I'm an intern with PennDOT, and I like my program that I'm doing at my school right now does a lot of like data analysis with R and Stata, and
okay.
DTA files are usually what we use to do data analysis, and it seems like a pretty generalized format because it works with both. So I was just trying to see what data format you guys were going to use if you were going to use something specific.
Yeah, we're not specifying format. All it needs to be is something that's commonly readable and can support tabular data.
Okay, we got another question in. I see one from Dan. Go ahead.
Yeah, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but when you showed the types of data you get from a station or a session, and you had attributes and fields, which is what types of information you're actually collecting, is that like still in development and these are just draft, or is there a final list of the types of information that would be extracted?
Yeah, let me point you to the exact file on GitHub that answers your question there.
Okay.
But we do have a set of list of inputs in table, well, across the 4 tables in this document that I've just dropped in the chat to say what fields we are expecting, not only as required in the spec, and that's essentially kind of a minimum level of reportability, and then additional unrequired or non-required fields which provide additional value. And like I said before, or like Nick said, I think this is extensible in that any of these fields could be made required by a program. You could add to this if you want. If you add additional inputs that you want from the provider. But the concept being that the stuff that is consistent or that is kind of spec wide stays consistent. So they might, charging provider might need to add some additional information for one program, but that most of the program information that they're sending is the same across all programs. And that would just be something you might add if you wanted to report, if you wanted to support a reporting metric that's not supported by the spec.
Do you know if
Okay,
do you know if information can be provided on a vehicle itself, meaning the type of vehicle or the engine, or I don't know, the model, or is that something that's not really supported through the transfer of data?
So there's a long answer to that. But the short answer is right now we're talking about getting data from the charging stations and the charging equipment, which for the most part, they are not sharing that kind of information at this time. There are other charging programs out there that try to pull data from a vehicle itself, through telematics and other means. That's actually not where we're at right now with the spec. It's not to say that the spec couldn't grow to go there. It's just the programs that we've been either involved in or aware of are primarily collecting data from the charging equipment.
Thank you.
Sure. Sarah,
so we're limited to whatever the vehicle communicates to the equipment in that regard.
Right. Yeah. Josh brings up a point. So the networks might be aware of the type of equipment, obviously, and that might be available through the network accounts for those users, but that might not be exactly what folks are looking for. Sarah, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, quick question, Nick. Thanks for the webinar. I know from your presentation and discussion with the Multi-State ZEV Task Force and the Georgetown Clean Vehicles Work Group that you've had some, at least one, possibly several conversations with the Joint Office to let them know about this effort, make them aware of the broad collaboration you're engaged in to develop this common spec. And I'm just strikes me, thinking about James's comment about how the efficiency for charging infrastructure providers will really go up as more jurisdictions adopt a common spec or adopt and modify a common spec. If you've gotten any sense of whether they will be encouraging its use, we are expecting some guidance from the Joint Office soon. And so I'm wondering either as part of that guidance or in the future, they might really encourage commonality in the ways that jurisdictions that participate in NEVI or other grant programs are collecting charging use data. Any sense of that?
I can't speak about that at this moment. We have had conversations with the good folks at the Joint Office who are trying to stand it up, including other folks at the labs who are supporting the Joint Office. And generally, they are receptive to the concepts that you just laid out, how important it is to do something in a common way so that the market is efficient and we can evaluate these programs in an apples to apples way. I can't speak to whether or not they're going to say like, let's do this thing or not. That's kind of up to them. But hopefully the guidance that should be coming out soon to give us some direction. But that's all I got for you right now on that. But
okay,
we are
yeah, thanks.
We are clearly supportive.
Fingers crossed.
Of it. Yeah, of course. And I see one of our friends in the Joint Utilities has written. Kate, has there been any even informal response from DOE about supporting something like this? I actually don't know what this is. Kate, could you come off mute and if you can share what this is?
I guess I'm saying, have you heard anything from DOE about supporting the work that you're doing here?
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's in line with what they were doing in the speeds is a similar spec for building efficiency data.
Yeah. It's the same response as what Sarah asked with the Joint Office. It's the same folks we're talking to, and so hopefully they'll join this effort more formally, but that's TBD.
What I will note is that this spec doesn't prescribe any kind of common warehousing of this data. So while everything would be collected in a similar way, there's no common repository like Beads is.
Yeah, that's a really important point. A lot of people have asked us that when we were talking with them. I'm sorry we didn't mention that earlier, but this is not about Atlas trying to collect a bunch of data from across the country and then store it and do something with it. It's about trying to make sure we have a common way of various individuals and groups collecting that data. Matt asks another question. Does the Atlas team have any expectation on when this might be considered final? Well, Matt, no spec is ever final. It's just versioned. And so I think we're going to be working on version 1 over the next few months. We had a slide where we talked about the timeline here. Within the next few months, we want to try to polish version 1 for use. So if you were putting together an RFP or whatnot in the near term, I think it'd be safe to say that you could reference the spec and say that the participants would be expected to follow version 1 of the spec because it should be polished by early summer. Any other questions from folks? Any other comments people want to share while we're all together here? Well, let me just reiterate and make another call to action. If you're interested in participating in this effort, we welcome all your feedback on GitHub directly through the website or through an email to info@evchargingspec.org. Final thanks again to the Alliance for Transportation Electrification for sponsoring all the time that the Atlas staff have put into pulling the common version of the spec together. And thanks to all our customers who's helped us learn so much about good practices and best practices for collecting charging use. It's a really, really exciting time in the EV charging market. We got a lot of money that's going to get spent, and we all hope that it'll be spent wisely, and we'll be able to evaluate these programs and really grow the market in the next few years. Looks like we got one last little question in here. Does the Atlas team anticipate any kind of standardization on the length of time to store past data? That's an interesting question. James, have we talked about that one internally?
We've talked internally, and in our experience, we suggest that programs require storing of data at least by a couple of reporting periods in the past. But there's nothing in the spec. There's no spec compliance to how long data is stored. The spec determines what kind of data should be reported, what format it should be reported in, but not the operations around managing that data.
So I just want to bring up, that's a really important question, Devin. As James mentioned, that kind of falls a little bit out of scope of what we have in terms of collecting data. However, we've also added addendums to this spec as time's gone on, as we learn more about things that are kind of loosely connected to these programs that are important to try to standardize on. And one example is the guidance documents language that we have for program compliance. Thanks to the kind folks at NYSERDA, we put together some general guidance language for folks to be able to reference or have a place to start for program participants and how they might be compliant with the charging reporting requirements. So this might be another example that Devin brings up of another potential addendum we want to put or extension of the spec. Any other closing thoughts anybody wants to share before we go?
Hey, Nick, this is Phil. I jumped on. I've been on for about 5-10 minutes. Thank you.
Hey, Phil. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. As I mentioned, this is being recorded, so it'll be available. We'll put it on the website and share it with folks afterwards. And if you want to continue to get emails from all of us working on this project, please send an email to info@evchargingspec.org, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks again. Appreciate it. Bye, everyone.